Have you ever wondered how the Jewish people managed to survive for millennia, facing persecution, exile, and adversity? How did a nation born in the desert become a light unto the nations? The answer lies in an epic journey marked by unshakable faith, surprising betrayals, and miraculous redemptions. It all began with a seemingly impossible promise made to a childless man. A promise that would change history forever. Our story begins with a man called Abram, later known as Abraham. In Genesis 12, God commanded him, "Get out of your country, from among your relatives and from your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation and bless you." Now imagine this scene. A 75-year-old man, with no children, hearing that he would become the father of a great nation. It seems impossible, doesn't it? But Abraham believed. He left everything behind and followed his faith. The years passed, and the promise seemed further and further away. Abraham and his wife Sarah grew old without children. But God is faithful. At the appointed time, according to Genesis 21, Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac, the son of promise. God reaffirmed his covenant with Abraham, declaring in Genesis 22:17, "I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven and like the sand on the seashore." Isaac grew up and married Rebekah, and together they had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. And this is where the story gets intense. Jacob, the younger son, got the blessing that should have belonged to the firstborn, sparking a rivalry with Esau that forced him to flee. On the way, he had a supernatural encounter with God, who reaffirmed the promise made to Abraham. "The land on which you are lying will be yours, and your descendants." Genesis 28:13. Jacob spent 20 years serving his uncle Laban, married Leah and Rachel, and had 12 sons. These 12 men would become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. Their names were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin. Each of them carried a unique destiny and identity, shaping the character of the tribes that would come to form a nation. But the journey there would be full of challenges, rivalries, and miracles. But the story of the 12 tribes of Israel would not be complete without a dramatic twist. Among Jacob's sons, Joseph, the penultimate, would play a crucial role in the family's destiny. The son of the beloved Rachel, Joseph was his father's favorite, which aroused envy among his brothers. To make matters worse, he had prophetic dreams indicating that one day he would rule over them. In Genesis 37:6-7, Joseph revealed one of his dreams. "We were binding sheaves of wheat in the field when my sheaf rose and stood upright, and its sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." This dream inflamed the brothers' anger even more. Driven by jealousy, they plotted against him. One day, when Joseph went to the field to meet them, they decided to get rid of him once and for all. At first, they thought of killing him, but ended up selling him as a slave to Midianite merchants who took him to Egypt. There, Joseph was bought by Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh. Even as a slave, God was with him, and everything he did prospered. However, he was unjustly accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison. Even so, God continued to work in his life. In prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of 2 of Pharaoh's servants, and his interpretations proved to be correct. 2 years later, Pharaoh himself had disturbing dreams that no one could decipher. It was then that they remembered Joseph and called him to interpret the dreams. With divine wisdom, Joseph explained that the dreams predicted 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. He advised the Pharaoh to store food during the years of plenty in order to survive the crisis. Impressed, Pharaoh made Joseph governor of Egypt, putting him in charge of the nation's administration. And so it was that this young Hebrew, sold into slavery, became the second most powerful person in the strongest empire of the time. When the famine hit, it also hit Canaan, where Jacob and his sons lived. In desperation, Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt to buy supplies, unaware that they were facing the one they had betrayed years before. In a moment of intense emotion, Joseph finally revealed his identity. In Genesis 45, 4-5, he told them, "I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed, for it is for the preservation of life that God has sent me ahead of you." Joseph held no grudges. On the contrary, he saw everything as part of God's plan. So he brought the whole family to Egypt, where they lived under his protection. In this way, Jacob's 12 sons and their families settled in Egypt. What had begun as a small family group was about to become a great nation. However, the scenario would change drastically over the years. The years passed, and Jacob's descendants prospered in Egypt. The small group that arrived as a family grew into a large people. But this prosperity would not last forever. A new Pharaoh ascended the throne, a ruler who neither knew Joseph nor cared about his legacy. He saw the Israelites as a threat and decided to enslave them. In Exodus 1-9-10, the Pharaoh declared, "Look, the people of Israel have become too numerous and too strong for us. We must act shrewdly, or they will continue to grow and, in the event of war, join our enemies." Thus began one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. The people were subjected to forced labor, suffering oppression and cruelty. But even under slavery, the Israelites continued to multiply, thwarting Pharaoh's plans. Faced with this, Pharaoh ordered an even crueler measure. All male babies were to be killed at birth. It was against this backdrop of terror that Moses was born, the one who would be Israel's deliverer. To save him, his mother put him in a basket and set him adrift on the river Nile. The Pharaoh's daughter found the baby and, moved by compassion, adopted him, raising him as an Egyptian prince. However, Moses never forgot his origins. As an adult, when he witnessed an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew, Moses intervened and ended up killing the aggressor. Fearing reprisals, he fled to the desert of Midian, where he lived for 40 years as a shepherd. It was then that God called him to an extraordinary mission. In a burning bush that would not be consumed, God said to him in Exodus 3:7-10, "I have seen the affliction of my people in Egypt and have heard their cry. I have come down to deliver them and bring them into a good and spacious land. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses hesitated, but God gave him signs and assured him that he would be with him. So he returned to Egypt and, together with his brother Aaron, confronted Pharaoh, demanding, "Let my people go." Pharaoh repeatedly refused, and God sent 10 devastating plagues upon Egypt, showing his power. The last plague was the most terrible, the death of the firstborn. Only houses that had the blood of a lamb on their doorposts were spared, an event that gave rise to the Jewish Passover. Only after this last plague did Pharaoh allow the Israelites to leave. But even after releasing them, he changed his mind and pursued the people with his army. It was then that one of the most impressive miracles in history took place. God opened the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry land. When the Egyptians tried to follow them, the waters closed over them, destroying Pharaoh's army. Now, finally free, the Israelites began their journey through the desert toward the Promised Land. However, the way there would not be easy. The crossing of the Red Sea was a milestone in Israel's history, but the desert would bring new challenges. Despite the miracles they witnessed, the Israelites soon began to murmur against Moses, complaining about the lack of food and water. However, God provided manna from heaven and caused water to flow from the rock, showing his care once again. On Mount Sinai, God sealed his covenant with Israel, giving Moses the 10 Commandments and instructions for community life. The people, however, demonstrated their spiritual instability by making a golden calf, falling into idolatry while Moses was still on the mountain. This act of rebellion resulted in severe discipline, but God renewed his covenant, reaffirming that Israel would be his chosen people. The journey through the desert should have been short, but because of the Israelites' lack of faith, God made them wander for 40 years until the generation that doubted him disappeared. Only Joshua and Caleb, the only ones who trusted in God's promise, were allowed to enter the promised land. When they finally reached the bank of the river Jordan, God repeated the miracle of the Red Sea. The waters opened up, allowing the Israelites to cross into Canaan. Under Joshua's leadership, they conquered fortified cities like Jericho, whose walls collapsed after 7 days of marching and trumpet blasts. The land was divided among the 12 tribes of Israel, each receiving its portion according to the promise made to Abraham. However, the unity of the nation was fragile. After Joshua's death, the Israelites went through an unstable period known as the Age of Judges, where they repeatedly fell into idolatry and were oppressed by enemy nations. It was only with the arrival of David from the tribe of Judah that Israel found stability. He unified the tribes and established Jerusalem as the capital. His son, Solomon, built the Temple of God, consolidating Israel as a regional power. However, after Solomon's death, the kingdom split into 2 parts, the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah. The north was dominated by idolatry and fell to the Assyrians. The south resisted for longer, but ended up in exile in Babylon. Even so, God did not abandon his people. A remnant returned to Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple and keeping the identity of the people of Israel alive. The story of the 12 tribes is one of faith, challenges, and promises fulfilled. Despite the ups and downs, God has always been faithful, and to this day, this journey continues to inspire millions, reminding us that we are part of a bigger story written by the Creator himself.